A personal encounter with email and other fraud. Google warns of email takeovers, and the U.S. telco industry continues to reel from the impact of a massive infiltration by Chinese hackers. This is Cybersecurity Today. I'm your host, Jim Love. This week, we've been hit by three very convincing hack attempts, two relating to emails related to invoice payments, and another much more clever. One of these freaked me out totally. It was a company looking for payment on an old invoice. It came with a long email chain showing their interactions with a previous and very senior employee, including his authorization of these charges. They made two mistakes, actually three, if you know how frugal our corporate culture is, so nobody would spend a significant amount of money without us discussing it. But they asked for too much, and they spent too little time on the description of the services in their fake. But otherwise, everything else was unbelievably believable. A second invoice came in for another smaller amount the same week, and it actually had our accountant following up with the company to ask questions about the amount due. Again, it wouldn't have slipped through our approval process because we're cheap and everything gets questioned. But for those who aren't in the publishing business and who actually make money with their companies, or have bigger organizations, some of these are getting through, especially when there's some disruption. For instance, the city of Hamilton, struck by ransomware that took out a lot of their files and backups, are estimating that they've been scammed out of $800,000 or more through phony invoices or similar schemes. I mentioned there were three of these hack attempts last week. We got an email from one of our employees asking us to have their pay sent to a new banking number. It was very well done. Now, we have a small company, so one of our people questioned it, and of course we verified it with the employee and found out it was a fraud. Net, with how well these email scams are done, we've set up a separate and encrypted means of communication just between the small group of us to be used for approvals. The impact? We've had to set up a cumbersome and less efficient means of issuing approvals for payment. We can't do that by email anymore. Now, for a company of our size, even a relatively small amount is a big deal. And by the way, we have endpoint protection and we use a cloud email that has a great blocking for spam and phishing emails. But as my friend David Shipley, Fisher King, as I like to call him, will always say, more gets through than you think. So if you haven't done so, you might want to take a step back and review your own email approval processes. Maybe, like you should have with your kids in an era of deep fakes, you might need the equivalent of a safe word. Love to hear your solutions and ideas about this. Please send them to me. Yeah, I know, sigh, by email at editorial@technewsday.ca. And still on the subject of email, Google is urging Gmail users to act swiftly to secure their accounts as attackers are increasingly exploiting session cookie theft and other methods to lock out legitimate users. And once hackers take control, they can change passwords, recovery options, even add their own security measures, leaving account owners with just 7 days in the case of Google to reclaim their access if they can do it at all. Now, the hackers often rely on phishing emails, malware, or session cookie theft to access these Gmail accounts. Session cookies, which keep users logged in without re-entering passwords, are particularly vulnerable when devices are compromised. Once inside, attackers move quickly, changing the account credentials and recovery methods, effectively locking out the rightful owner. Once an account is taken over, Google, as we mentioned, provides only a 7-day window to reclaim it before attackers can entrench their control. And this makes swift action crucial, preventing permanent loss of access. And as all too many users will find out, when and if your email is compromised, you're not going to be able to talk to a person at Google unless you have a huge company and some great influence. What you have is some help text and a prayer. So here's what Google recommends. Google emphasizes the importance of immediate action if you suspect your account is compromised. They say to visit their recovery page and use their account recovery tool. You should provide backup info, ensuring recovery email addresses and phone numbers are updated and accessible so that you can recover your account. They say to monitor for changes, review recent account activity, and update your settings, and enable added security measures, two-factor authentication, or physical security keys or pass keys for stronger protection. But this warning isn't limited to Gmail users. Session cookie theft, which allows attackers to bypass passwords and two-factor authentication, is on the rise on all email platforms. This method lets hackers hijack existing sessions, giving them full access without triggering alerts in many cases. And it's increasingly important for users to take additional care. Many of the steps are the same as we recommended for Google, adopting phishing-resistant security, checking your recovery options, but also, and this is something that might be applicable to all, is to avoid public Wi-Fi. Open networks can expose your session cookies to attackers, and, of course, advising our users to stay vigilant, being cautious with email links, attachments, even from familiar sources. I've also been advising people to fully log out of their email sessions when they're done. Leaving their email open or checking those remember me boxes that extend the life of session cookies, probably not a good idea, regardless of how convenient it is. And I know a large part of our audience work in corporate security, and many of the things I've said are obvious, but they're things that we should be getting across to our user community. And something you probably also know is when these email hacks come in through a user's private email account, there are still potential implications for our corporate accounts. As email remains the cornerstone of personal and professional communication, this has got to be a wake-up call for users and corporate security people to help strengthen defenses. Whether you're a Gmail user or on another platform, the proactive measures can save you from some devastating breaches. And the fallout continues as the scope of what can only be called the total infiltration of the U.S. telecom providers as telcos and regulators come to terms with the difficulty of how to evict Chinese-backed hackers from their networks. The group known as Salt Typhoon has exploited vulnerabilities in legacy systems to spy on high-value targets, including government officials and journalists, and the breach underscores the difficulty of securing these vast and aging networks. Salt Typhoon has infiltrated 8 major U.S. telecom providers and remains embedded in some systems, according to federal officials. The attackers exploited legacy equipment, some of it nearly 50 years old, and wiretap systems required for law enforcement access. Fixing these vulnerabilities requires patching probably every device from outdated routers to employee computers, and a massive logistical challenge. T-Mobile, as we mentioned last week, fared better than other providers thanks to its fully wireless 5G-based network. With no legacy landline system, the company was able to quickly detect and block an attempted intrusion through a wireline partner. However, other providers are facing greater risks due to their reliance on older, more complex infrastructure. Experts say many breaches come down to basic security lapses like unpatched devices or weak authentication, and federal agencies have urged telecoms to implement stricter security measures, including multi-factor authentication and comprehensive activity logging. But even with these defenses, nation-state actors like Salt Typhoon are highly skilled at covering their tracks and finding new ways in. So the fight to secure U.S. telecoms is far from over. But it makes you think, not too long ago, a number of countries decided not to have Huawei equipment as part of their networks because they were afraid that China could use it to spy on their network. Probably a good decision, but apparently not the only step they needed to take. And that's our show for today. You can find links to reports and other details in our show notes at technewsday.com. We welcome your comments, tips, and the occasional bit of constructive criticism at editorial@technewsday.ca. I'm your host, Jim Love. Thanks for listening.